Ever looked at a movie's Rotten Tomatoes score and thought, wow, 90%? This must be amazing. Only to walk out of the theater wondering if you've even watched the same film. Or maybe you've skipped a movie because it had a 42%, but then later discovered it was a hidden gem. Yep, we've all been there, and today we're cracking open the tomato. And trust me, it's juicier than you think. Hey everyone, I'm Adam, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most influential and misunderstood metrics in modern moviegoing, Rotten Tomato scores. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly how the Tomatometer works, the difference between critic and audience scores, and why these numbers can often be misleading. We'll look at real examples of how it's affected movies over the years, and I'll even give you a few tips on how to actually read a Rotten Tomato score the right way. Stick around, because later in the video, I'll tell you which movie I think has the most misleading tomato score of all time. You won't believe it. Let's start with the basics. What is the Tomatometer? Rotten Tomatoes is a movie and TV review aggregator. It pulls together reviews from critics all over the world and calculates what percentage of those critics gave the movie a positive review. And here's the first key point. That percentage is not an average score. It's just the portion of critics who liked it. So if 100 critics review a movie and 76 of them give it a review that was deemed positive, the movie gets a 76% score. Pretty simple, right? Well, here's where things get tricky. A critic could give a film a 3 out of 5, which is kinda and it would still count as a positive review. Another critic might give it a 4.5 out of 5 and love it. Both count the same towards the Tomatometer. They're just one vote each in the positive column. So a movie that's got a 90% Tomatometer score might not actually be a 9 out of 10 movie. It could be a whole bunch of 6s and 7s, just enough to squeak into that fresh territory. Let's pause there and really think about that. Imagine two movies. Movie A gets okay reviews from 50 critics, all rating it around 7 out of 10. Movie B gets 100 reviews, and 75 of them rate it the best movie ever, a 10 out of 10. But there are a few who it didn't resonate with and gave it a lesser score. Movie A would have a 100% score if all 50 reviews were counted as fresh. Movie B, even with 75 10 out of 10 reviews, would be at a 75. Yet you might actually end up loving movie B versus just kind of enjoying movie A. That's the nuance that the Tomatometer flattens. It turns a wide spectrum of opinions into a binary fresh or rotten. No middle ground, no subtlety. Similarly, a movie could have a 58%, which seems low, but if the negative reviews are just it's okay, not great, and the positive ones are glowing, then maybe you would end up loving it. And that's not even getting into how different the critic and audience scores can be. Let's look at Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Critics gave it a 91%. That's incredibly high. But the audience score? It's hovering around 41%. That's a massive gap. Why? Well, critics looked at it from a cinematic storytelling perspective. They praised its bold choices, Rian Johnson's direction, and the way it subverted expectations. But many fans felt it betrayed characters and themes that had been built over decades. They felt alienated. That divide is fascinating. And it's not an isolated case. Take Dave Chappelle's The Closer. Critics gave it a low score, 40%. But the audience score? 95%. You'd think they were rating different specials. There's a reason for this. Audiences score come from regular users who log in and rate a film. Critics are, well, critics. Often trained writers, journalists, or film scholars. They approach movies with a different set of expectations and criteria. That's not necessarily bad, but it does mean their reviews don't always align with general audience taste. Sometimes it's even about timing. Critics often get early access to films, sometimes in press screenings with ideal audio-visual conditions and no distractions. But an audience watching the same movie on a glitchy streaming app or with a crowd that's not into it can walk away with a very different experience. Another layer to this, the type of critic matters. Rotten Tomatoes distinguishes between top critics and the broader pool. Top critics are typically from more mainstream or legacy publications, like the New York Times, The Guardian, Variety, etc. They tend to be more established, but also tend to review movies a little differently. Sometimes they focus more on cultural relevance or filmmaking technique, whereas smaller sites like mine might focus more on entertainment value or fan base loyalty. So when you see a score on Rotten Tomatoes, ask yourself, is this the top critic score or the regular one? Because sometimes they're wildly different. Let's talk about another movie that got hit hard by the system. Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. The film scored 29% on the Tomatometer. That's rough. But if you read the reviews, a lot of them weren't saying it was terrible. Many just thought it was messy, overstuffed, or didn't like the tone. Some critics praised the ambition and the visual style, but just because those reviews leaned negative, they all counted as rotten. And once that number hit the internet, 29%, the narrative was set. Headlines read Batman vs. Superman is a disaster, and that perception stuck, no matter what fans thought. There's also the issue of review bombing, when audiences flood the site with negative or positive ratings just to skew the audience score. This has happened with a lot of politically charged films or shows like Captain Marvel, The Little Mermaid, or She-Hulk. Rotten Tomatoes has had to step in multiple times to change how they collect audience scores. For example, they now only allow audience ratings after a movie is released to reduce pre-release bombing. A quick side note, and this is important, Rotten Tomatoes is owned by Fandango. That's right, a ticket-selling service owns one of the most influential review platforms. That doesn't necessarily mean there's bias, but it's always good to follow the money. Just be aware of the relationships between the studios, the critics, and the platforms. Here's another nuance. Movies with a small number of reviews can have inflated or deflated scores. Say an indie horror movie only gets 10 critic reviews, and 9 of them are positive. Boom, it's a 90%. But that doesn't mean it's an Oscar contender just yet. It just means the handful of people who saw it mostly liked it. Now let's look at the inverse. A big budget blockbuster gets 300 reviews. Even if 210 critics liked it and 90 didn't, that's still a 70%. That might seem lower, but it's from a way larger pool, and the bar for entry is different. Some genres are also more critic-proof than others. Horror, for example, tends to get hammered by critics but embraced by audiences. Look at Five Nights at Freddy's. Critics were lukewarm, but the loyal fans loved it. Or the Fast and the Furious franchise. Most of those movies live in the 50 to 60% range with the critics, but audiences keep showing up because they know exactly what they're gonna get. So how should you actually use Rotten Tomatoes? Here's what I do. I check both the critic and the audience scores. I click into the reviews and read a few blurbs. I look at whether the movie has a lot of reviews or just a handful. I check the average rating, not just the percentage. And remember, this is just one tool. I also look at Metacritic, IMDb scores, Letterboxd, and good old YouTube reviews. Because film is subjective, and algorithms can't predict your taste. Alright, so what's the most misleading tomato score I've ever seen? Easy. Hocus Pocus.
We shall be back!
The critic score? 41%. The audience score? 72%. And in reality, it's become a cult classic. People love this movie. It's a Halloween staple now. But back in the 90s, critics weren't having it. They thought it was too cheesy, too childish, and had an identity crisis. But audiences, especially kids and families, connected with it. And now, decades later, it's one of the most rewatched seasonal movies ever.
I hate Peter Pan.
You can also throw in Hook with Robin Williams. It's sitting at a 29% critic score, but for so many of us, that movie is pure childhood magic. Just because it didn't resonate with adult critics at the time, doesn't mean it didn't resonate with us. That's the power and the problem with Rotten Tomatoes. A score might reflect a moment in time, a narrow demographic, or even just a bad PR cycle, but it doesn't always reflect how people actually feel about a movie over time. So next time you see a Rotten Tomatoes score, don't take it at face value. Dig a little deeper. Read the reviews, consider the source, and remember, you might love a movie that everyone else hates, or hate one that critics adored. Because in the end, movies are about connection, emotion, entertainment, and no percentage can measure that. If you found this video helpful or just interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into movies, shows, and the industry we love. And hey, what's your favorite movie with a terrible Rotten Tomatoes score? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what hidden gems you found. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.